in abutting fronts, the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts, into 1,000 parts divide one man, and make imaginary puissance. Think when we talk of horses, that you see them printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. For it is your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass, for the which supply admit me chorus to this history, who prologue-like your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play.
In his country home, between finishing a film and starting a play, he talked to me over several days and confessed that he sometimes worries about his total and exclusive absorption in the world of acting.
I was very hesitant about making this program because one's bound to reveal oneself and one isn't very proud of it. And I think it's although in a way acting depends on your scraping away the details of your personality and using all your qualities to some extent, one is also somewhat ashamed of them being so lacking. I mean, I've never had interest in politics or sport, and two great wars have sort of passed me by in a way. I was sort of in them, not in either of them. And I've been so lucky and had such wonderful people to work with that I've been occupied and had fun and made many wonderful friends. One has nothing to reproach oneself with in that way. But I'm ashamed that I haven't got more to offer, really, than just being an actor.
Born in 1904, he inherited the mantle of the great theatrical dynasty of the Terrys. His grandmother, Kate Terry, was followed onto the stage by her sisters Ellen, Marion, and Florence, and brother Fred. Though John's parents were neither of them actors, they encouraged his interest in his famous relatives.
Julia Neilson and Fred Terry were touring the provinces, but they had seasons in London, and I was taken by my grandmother to see them in the Scarlet Pimpernel and Sweet Nellie Drury, which were their great war horses. They played them for many, many years with huge success, and of course I adored them. And Fred became a great hero to me, and I remember going around to the stage door at the Borough Stratford after the Pimpernel, and he came out in his full makeup with a white satin coat and gave me a pound tip, which was a real pound in those days, which was rather lovely. And then I began reading a great deal, and I read the Gordon Craig on the art of the theatre, and understood that he was a second cousin of mine, though he never came to our house. I don't think my mother and father quite approved of him. And then I realized that he was the son of Ellen Terry, and she came to one of the Christmas parties and signed one of his books for me, as well as one of her own. And I fell madly in love with her on the spot.
Although as a child you still thought you wanted to be a designer or something like that, you did in fact act at school, didn't you?
Oh, I acted always, yes. And I sort of enjoyed it. I remember enjoying doing Mark Antony and making some titled lady in the audience weep. I was very vain. I thought I looked awfully splendid. But I was always rather absurdly conceited about my voice. And it did me a lot of harm because I gave various sing-song performances. And the people who were really honest used to tell me I was getting very affected and full of myself. And Edith Evans once said to me very politely, you know, if you cried a little less, the audience would cry more, which was quite true. I used to flatter myself that my real tears were of such value. But all the Terrys had them. My mother said she couldn't think why she cried so much at plays, and the doctor said, oh, just weak lacrimal glands, my dear. But I've always had the same lacrimal glands. And I once made a very unfortunate remark to a reporter who said to me about crying tears, and I said, yes, I always burst into tears if I see a regiment marching or a queen passing. Wasn't quite the right thing.
The chrysalis of his talent opened only uncertainly in the early parts, like the poet Butterfly in the insect play. But clever producers realized his potential. His youthful technique was by happy chance recorded on silent film.
And Barry Jackson also, after a great deal of auditioning, gave me the part of Romeo with Gwen Franklin Davis in 24 when I was still very young, 19 I was. And I was pretty awful in it. But of course it was a great excitement to be given this great leading part, although I really feel I failed completely. But when I had to, I thought I spoke it well, but perhaps too well. I was too aware of the fact that I spoke well, showed that off. And I couldn't manage the clothes or the love scenes or the fights or anything. And Gwen was a marvelous friend to me, and she has been ever since.
She had reservations about you playing the part, though, didn't she?
Oh, she didn't want me much, no. She'd seen me in the insect play, and I thought I was simply terrible.
In 1929, Lillian Bayliss invited Gielgud to lead the company at the Old Vic. His performances there put him in the front rank of Shakespearean actors, especially with Hamlet, the youngest in living memory. It's a part of such complexity that no one could possibly carry every note in their head in performance at one time.
That's why it's such an extraordinary part. You'll never cease to find new things in it. But if you begin to succeed in one bit, then you find you've spoiled another one. And I probably think that my first performance at the Vic, when I was only 25, was probably the best, because it was done it was more spontaneous. I hadn't had time to worry about the complications of the character and all the other people's. It's true, I'd seen a great many people play Hamlet, so I suppose I had a lot of old-fashioned ideas probably that cribbed from them. I tried to make it more my own as the years went by.
Hamlet's a long and very demanding part. Are there sections of the play, scenes of the play, that are much more difficult than others?
I don't really remember that. I know I got very tired the last time I played it in the end of the war. When I used sometimes to have two performances. We had a 3.5 hour, I think, version. And I only had one break in the Ophelia mad scene. And then I used to lie down on my couch for 3/4 of an hour and then start again for the evening performance. That was terribly tiring. And I used to think on the matinee days, well, here I am playing for the last time this extraordinary part that has brought so much knowledge and excitement to my career. And I could do it in a week's time, but not twice today and once tomorrow. Well, we weren't playing every night, as a matter of fact, but we used to play matinee days twice sometimes in 1944. And then I did find it a tremendous strain. But when I directed Burton in it about 15 years ago in New York, and I said the only help I was to him was to show him where the more relaxed scenes could come, but he needn't tear himself to shreds in the dark, in the scene with the ghost, for instance, and various other passages, where I called kind of levels between the big emotional climaxes. And he found that was very helpful. But he was an strange boy, because he never was alone with me, except once. I think we had one rehearsal by ourselves. And even then somebody hid in a dress basket and took notes to write a book about it afterwards.
How do you cope with the passage of time in Hamlet?
Well, Gravedigger says he's 30. I always imagine that the audience are meant to imagine that time passes, just as in Macbeth you get the impression that there's possibly a couple of years passed before the last act. But Shakespeare didn't worry about that. And one of the things that Barker told me, which I thought so illuminating, I remember once in Lear has a great curse to Goneril, and he leaves the stage. And then he comes back in tears a few minutes later and has another sort of attack on her and then goes. And I said, well, he comes back and says that his followers have been dismissed without his being consulted. So I said to Barker, but who told him that off stage? He said, it doesn't matter who told him that. He said, until Pinero and Ibsen, writers didn't account for off-stage time. They knew the audience would accept it. They would accept that you went off the stage to write a letter. When you came back, the letter was written. But in Pinero or Ibsen, it was the exact right time it elapsed for it to be written. Whereas in Hamlet or Macbeth, they got a bit older or a bit younger. Presumably, whoever was playing it, Burbage probably wasn't very young when he played Hamlet. Maybe they put in the line about being 30 to please the groundlings in the graveyard scene quite late on in the play.
You made a great success when you did it the second time in the West End, and they said that you made the part your own. Then when you went to America, did you find that you had to throw that on one side and start fresh?
Oh, I loved America. I loved the American Hamlet weeks. I think I enjoyed more than the time I ever played the part, because it was such a success there, and I was a foreigner arriving, English actor. Leslie Howard was up against me playing it at another theatre. I was not so successful as I was, which was embarrassing, but at the same time gratifying. And it was an American company who were very pleased to work with me. Lillian Gish, who became an enormous friend, a charming old actor called Arthur Byron, who played Polonius, Malcolm Keane, who I knew slightly from England, playing the King, and Harry Andrews, who who they took over to play Fortinbras, and then we hadn't got a proper Horatio, so he was promoted to Horatio, and I helped him a bit with that, and we got on awfully well and became great friends.
You had reservations about your Ophelia to begin with?
Only because I thought she was perhaps too old, because I'd seen Lillian Gish as a boy. I'd seen her advertisements in the Tube in London, two little strangers of whom the world will soon be talking. There were these two little girls with straw hats and ribbons, which was Orphans of the Storm with Lillian and Dorothy Gish. So when McClintock said, we're going to have Lillian Gish, I said, oh, is she young enough? And he laughed. And about 3 nights later, the stage doorkeeper said, there's a lady to see you. I said, oh. Round the door came this little pretty hat with the ribbons, and Lillian Gish saying, am I too old for Ophelia? It was very endearing and sweet. She was wonderfully good in it. Wore a stocking on her arm in the mad scene.
He returned to the part on the brink of war in 1939, when he took the Prince of Denmark home to Elsinore.
There was one marvelous moment in Elsinore. I had a very tiresome fan who followed me there. I used to have them in those days. And she and her friend used to move their seats all through the play and sit opposite me. And so one night I changed all my moves to evade them. And the other actors on the stage didn't know what was going to happen. President Castle and Gilderson were pursuing me around the stage. Anyhow, it was very funny. Then the next day, one of these ladies came up to the table where we were all having dinner and said, of course, I've translated all the notices for you. I thought you'd like to see them in English. And handed me a big sheet of paper, which, like a fool, I started to read without reading it first. And I suddenly heard myself, with all the company sitting around, saying, Miss Compton has neither the youth nor the looks for Ophelia, but obviously comes of good theatrical stock. Can you imagine that, my face? And Faye was wonderful. She roared with laughter. She took it right on the chin. But it was a dreadful thing to happen. And of course, Croce is one of my most famous bricks. But one taught me never to read letters aloud without reading them first.
How did you find taking Hamlet on tour to the troops?
The troops? I loved it. I mean, it was a very exhausting and hazardous job. We took our costumes. It was a bit rash because it was so hot in India and the Far East. But they did make a great effect on the stage. We had some black tabs and we had lights that kind of made the ghost look quite effective. And I had the feeling when the soldiers saw the first act and saw the ghost, that they really were taken by the story. You know, they didn't know how it ended. They loved it. And we did Blithe Spirit with it on other nights. They used to stop me and say, why didn't you bring us a good play like the one we saw last night? They liked Hamlet much better. And it was quite an ambitious thing because we took about 15 people, I think. And we had these quite grand clothes which nearly killed us with the heat. I used to say to Marion Spencer, who played the Queen, oh, please don't throw your train in the last act. All the dust in India gets up into my nose. And she said, but I don't feel like a queen when I don't throw my train.
His last performance of Hamlet was in the 1948 radio recording, and the speech after the player King's exit reveals the intensity and the clarity of his performance.
Now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from its working all his visage wanned, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. And I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John a dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. No, not for a king, upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made.
John, how did you find this house?
Well, I knew the lady who has the big house many years ago when she lived in London in Addison Road. And I came down once with the idea of perhaps leasing the other pavilion for the summer, but unfortunately she'd let it to somebody else. This was owned by Arthur Bryant, the historian, who lived here for 10 years. And then he suddenly, in country life, I've been looking at houses all outside London. I had an idea I would like to move into the country. And I mostly saw Tudor houses with beams and low ceilings, which I didn't like. And I suddenly saw in country life an advertisement for this pavilion, which I realized I'd seen from the big house when I'd visited Mrs. Brunner. And so I came down and saw it, fell in love with it, and rather rashly decided to take it from him. And then a great friend of mine decorated it for me for about 3 years. And we moved in together in 76. I bought it in 73. And I've lived here ever since. And I love it very much. I wondered whether it would be congenial for me to live out of London, because I'd lived there all my life. But I found it very, very agreeable.
Yes, Ralph Richardson said that you were a town rat, basically.
Oh, I am. I mean, I really am a Cockney, I suppose. And I always adored London, but I find it so full of memories for me now, and places have changed so much, and it's so difficult to get around in, but I don't really miss it as I expected to.
Are you expert on garden?
Not at all. I know nothing about them. I know nothing about decoration or garden. Unfortunately, the man I live with has a great talent for it, and he's done really all the work here, and I've had the pleasure of enjoying it.
Sir John's enthusiastic interest in everything connected with the theatre soon led him into direction.
I got into direction when I did Romeo and Juliet. I directed that. The first play I ever directed was Romeo and Juliet at Oxford, with Christopher Hassel, who died afterwards, a poet, and Peggy Ashcroft, Edith Evans, and the rest of the cast was Hugh Hunt, Terence Rattigan, William Devlin. They all did pretty well afterwards. And Gwen and Edith Evans' husband had just died. She'd come back from America, having played the nurse there with Catherine Cornell for a few nights. And her husband then died, and she came back, and she was very, very low spirits. And she promised to come and play it for us with the boys, which I think sort of cheered her up a bit. And Peggy, who I'd seen as Desdemona with Robests and Othello in 1930, a very bad production, in which Ralph Richardson, as Roderigo, said that he kept a torch in his sleeve to light up his own face, because there was so little light on the stage. And so I just got to know Peggy through that. And she offered to come play Juliet, so that was the most thrilling time for me. I was acting in The Good Companions in London, and rushing up to Oxford every morning or night or something, and rehearsing all day and coming back to His Majesty's in the evening. And I started doing that and doing films. So I was filming, acting, directing, all these things together for about 10 years, I suppose, and enjoying it all keenly. Never seemed to have time for anything else, but I survived very well and enjoyed it.
In fact, you were known as a real glutton for work when you were doing Richard of Bordeaux. You wanted to do matinees of Richard II as well.
I did, and yes, and Francis just said, "You like work, don't you?" And he was very depressed at the idea. But I used to get frightfully tired. But I just adore working, you know, and I still do. I have something to do. It cheers me up for a long time.
You talked of your early films. You weren't very keen on the film industry at this time.
But I sort of liked the idea of films, because I thought it was so exciting to be seen on the screen. And strange silent films even. I made 1 or 2, I think, with orchestras playing in the studio and mad directors who shouted at you all the time. Then I did a Good Companions with Victor Saville, and I did the Secret Agent with Hitchcock. But then I was playing Romeo and Mercutio alternately with Olivier, directing the play, and doing the Secret Agent in the daytime. How I did it, I can't imagine now. Perhaps I was very bad in most nights. But I just seem to have had boundless energy and health to get through all that work.
In 1935, he directed Olivier as Romeo, with himself as Mercutio, and after 6 weeks they swapped parts. It aroused great interest and controversy.
Well, there was a great argument. He was very upset because Agate and 1 or 2 people said he couldn't speak the verse, and I kept on telling him he didn't speak very well. And he spoke pretty well. He had certain mannerisms which he just has to this day, just as I have. But he was wonderful as Romeo, much, much better than I was. And his Mercutio was also extraordinarily good. I don't really know how I stood up to him in either part, because he was so lithe and Italianate and exciting in both parts. And I was always rather soppy, I think, in a way. But I had a few scenes that I think I was good in.
Peggy Ashcroft played Juliet in that famous Romeo and Juliet that you did.
Yes, and also at Oxford. So I was twice with her in it.
Does she have a great insight into playing Shakespearean heroines?
Extraordinary she is. She makes no fuss, she never talks about these things, she doesn't have great arguments and psychological discussions. She goes straight at it. But I remember seeing her as Desdemona that time at the Rose, from the first time I ever saw her on the stage, and it was quite magical from the front. And I have seen her quite a number of times. I'd not thought of her as Peggy, which is, of course, the great compliment. I so often had it with Edith Evans, too, that you really believed they were the character they were playing, and one had no recollection of knowing them so well in private life, which is a very great achievement, really, for an actor.
Were they both instinctive actresses?
Oh, I think so. Edith Evans never would discuss her acting very much. She played, she went to the text, and she said, I must be truth, don't make effects. She was very sort of, she talked rather nonsense, I think, about her, if she did talk about her acting. She just did it so beautifully.
But truth in acting was something she talked about a lot.
Oh, yes, it was, and it was a very good line to take. And it's what we all strive for in a way. But of course, acting is not truth. You can't pretend that it is. It's an effect is an effect, whether you like it or not. And it is essential for a performance to be effective, or it doesn't carry over the first 5 rows. So you can't say I never make effects, because obviously you do.
In 1937, John Gielgud had a brilliant success in a completely new venture as an actor-manager. He took a classical repertory of 4 plays into the Queen's Theatre in the West End with his own hand-picked company of actors.
Well, that was a rather daring thing to do, because I came back from America after a great success in Hamlet there, and in a play that was a ghastly failure that Emily Williams wrote for me, in which we directed together, and it ran a week, and we didn't know quite what to do. And then we suddenly decided, John Perry and I, who's a great friend of mine who worked with Beaumont too, to put up some money for a season. And we engaged as many of our companies I'd worked with in the 30s, in the early 30s, to play with us. And we evolved this program of Richard II, School for Scandal, Three Sisters, and The Merchant of Venice, with Peggy Ashcroft as leading lady. And then we had Angela Baddeley and Gwen Franken Davis in for the Three Sisters, added to the company. And we had a marvelous team, really. It was Alec Guinness and Harry Andrews, Tony Quayle, Dean Quartermain, Freddie Lloyd, who was a lovely old actor. And the best production, I think, was the Three Sisters, which I asked Michel Saint-Denis to direct, and which was a sensational success, although I don't think it perhaps made less money than the other 3.
But a lot of the designers you've worked with have a very painterly touch, like the Motleys and Leslie Hurley.
Yes, well, I found that in my exhibition. I was surprised to see there's Michael Ayrton designs for Macbeth, and Ayrton was greatly influenced by it. Everything was sort of marbled and checkered and striped. And in a way it was very effective, but he hadn't much mercy on the play. And the whole thing that I kept on trying to get him to cut out, which he put in as being symbolical, huge hands and strange crowns and odd places. It overlaid the play, and it also made the scene changes very difficult. If you try and be in any way spectacular with Macbeth, you are in terrible trouble. I remember Sybil Thorndike and Ainley doing one when Ricketts had done the scenery. It was all very ambitious, and terrible tableaus of battles and things. It didn't work at all. And it made the play so slow. There were intervals and music, and it hung fire all the time. And it's not a play I think you can do in any way realistically at all.
Is it the most difficult Shakespeare play?
I don't know. It's the shortest. I find it's still a wonderful play to do. And when I did it with Ralph Stratford, it was such a failure. I designed the scenery, which was all black. I was rather proud of it, but nobody liked it. And I thought I had managed the apparitions and the battle, and Burnham Wood coming down rather well. But it wasn't any success. Margaret Leighton was very good as Lady Macbeth. Richardson was very unhappy as Macbeth. He kept on saying, "But if I can't see the dagger cocky, can you wonder the audience can't either?" It was very endearing. It didn't help the production. He was very unhappy.
In 1949, Christopher Fry's verse play, The Lady's Not for Burning, was John Gielgud's first introduction to Richard Burton.
I'd heard of Richard Burton vaguely. The talk around the town was this boy had come from Wales and was awfully talented. I don't think I'd seen the film The Last Days of Dolwyn. I might have done. But then I was a friend of Emmeline's, and Emmeline had been a great friend of mine. And he'd been in one play of Emmeline's called The Druid's Rest. And then they said, well, of course, you must have Burton for the boy. And I said, oh, Burton, who's that? He arrived at the first rehearsal, and of course, he read it absolutely perfectly. And the only thing he did, he used to start yawning about 1:45, say, I want my lunch. I used to get annoyed at that, but he was perfect. He had an amazing instinct for the stage. He just did everything right. And he seemed to have no fear. But it's a very great joy to see somebody who really does enjoy it as much as that. Because most actors tremble and shake and get ill and feel faint and wish they'd never come near the place. And I used to have fearful fits of depression. I remember standing in the wings in Romeo and as the regent and all those years ago, and I was 19 and thinking, well, supposing I walked out of the stage door now into the streets, they'd never be able to find me, and everybody would be upset except myself. And shall I do it? Sort of awful dare, you know. And I think most actors have that feeling. And then when you get haunted with that, you may dry up or you may make a mistake. But Burton was the sort of man who could cover a mistake, and I always felt with him he was almost as happy talking to friends in a room or reciting or telling stories or sitting in a pub drinking with a lot of chaps as he was even in the theatre. He was an extraordinarily natural character in a way, and yet with all the marriage to Elizabeth and all that, he became such a figure of importance and grandeur and pomp that it was rather curious to see this mixture of naivete and sophistication. I don't know that he ever quite got used to it.
In the late 50s, Sir John thrilled theatre audiences around the world with his one-man Shakespeare recital, The Ages of Man, which he recorded for American television.
I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite over-canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses and with eglantine. There sleeps Titania some time of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. And there the snake throws her enameled skin weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in. And with the juice of this, I'll streak her eyes and make her full of hateful fantasies.
In speaking Shakespeare,
you said that you threw yourself on the verse like a swimmer. What did you mean by that?
Well, I really only made that statement years afterwards when somebody asked me in an article when I was doing Ages of Man. And I said then that I'd learned from doing bits without the proper context. I mean, taking speeches individually out of the plays. So one had to learn that in each speech there was a climax, a rise and a climax and a fall. And you had to find that space and observe it, more or less, have it in your mind that where you were going to and where you were coming from. And then you could put in any amount of variations, like playing in the piano, I suppose, like various people do with Chopin, play it in quite different style, and yet keep the essential architecture of the speech correct.
that architecture is especially important for the great emotional speeches of Shakespeare. In the Olivier film of Richard III, Clarence's premonition of death gives Sir John one of his very favourite speeches.
Thought what pain it was to drown. What dreadful noise of water in mine ears. What ugly sights of death within mine eyes. I thought I saw 1,000 fearful wrecks. 10,000 men that fishes gnawed upon. Wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearl, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered at the bottom of the sea.
Had you such leisure in the time of death to gaze upon the secrets of the deep?
Methought I had, and often did I strive to yield the ghost. Still the envious flood kept in my soul, and would not let it forth to find the empty, vast, and wandering air, but smothered it within my panting bulk,
which almost burst to belch in the sea.
Awoke you not with this sore agony?
No. My dream was lengthened afterlife. Oh, then began the tempest to my soul. I crossed, methought, the melancholy flood with that grim ferryman that poets write of, into the kingdom of perpetual night. The first that there did greet my stranger soul was my great father-in-law, renowned Warwick, who cried aloud, "What scourge for perjury can this dark monarchy afford? False Clarence!" So he vanished. Then came wandering by a shadow like an angel, with bright hair dabbled with blood. And he shrieked out aloud, "Clarence is come! False, fleeting, perjured Clarence has stabbed me in the field by Tewkesbury! Caesar in furies! Take him to your corners!" As the thought legion of foul fiends environed me, and howled in my ears such hideous cries, that with the very noise I trembling waked. And for a season after, could not believe but that I was in hell. Such terrible impression made my dream.
No marvel, my lord, that it frightened you. I promise you I am afraid to hear you tell it.
Oh, Brackenbury, I have done those things which now bear evidence against my soul. For Edward's sake. And see how he requites me. Oh God, if my deep prayers will not appease thee, but thou wilt be avenged on my misdeeds, yet execute thy wrath on me alone. Oh, spare my guiltless wife and my poor children. I pray thee, gentle keeper, stay with me. My soul is heavy, and I fain would sleep.
I will, my lord. God give you grace. Good rest.
John Gielgud was for many years very wary of the cinema. He found its whole approach unhelpful to the actor.
In films, you never know when you're going to be suddenly given a day off, or you're going to stop in the middle of the day, or you're going to begin very early with some frightfully emotional scene. You have to be prepared for any emergency. I mean, I remember Olivier telling me the horror he had when he did As You Like It with Elizabeth Bergner. And they said, "Oh, she's not coming today, and we'll just pin this piece of paper on the tree. That's where she'll probably stand. You better walk around 2 or 3 times." And then she came down and saw his rushes and put herself into the scene the way she wanted to dominate it. But they didn't play the scene together at all. But there are so many things you have to do that are not natural, like keeping in the right angle, not keeping your head in the right place, moving on your marks to a certain place. I always remember in Hollywood, I said to when I was playing the first scene with Cassius, with Brutus, with James Mason, I said to them, "It's so difficult for me from the theater, having to do a scene when I walk up steps and stop on the 4th step without having to look at it, and fall more steps and then another speech. This I would work out in the theater for weeks, and I would find it quite easy, but it's very difficult to do quickly and not to make mistakes." And he said, "Well, you know, the great exponent of this kind of work is Tyrone Power. He can be in bed in a scene, and the camera comes down to the roof of the studio, right down to him, and he can wake up, yawn, stretch, jump out of bed and hit his marks." He thought that was the ideal film star. I learned a lot from that.
Gielgud was nearly 50 when he had his first great international screen success in the Hollywood Julius Caesar, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz. His co-stars were Marlon Brando and James Mason.
When Caesar lived, he durst not thus have moved me.
Peace, you durst not so have tempted him.
Durst not?
No.
What durst not tempt him?
For your life you durst not.
Do not presume too much upon my love. I may do that I shall be sorry for.
You have done that you shall be sorry for. There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats, for I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass by me as the idle wind, which I respect not. I did send to you for certain sums of gold, which you denied me, for I can raise no money by vile means. I did send to you for gold to pay my legions, which you denied me. Was that done like Cassius?
I denied you not.
You did?
I did not. He was but a fool that brought my answer back.
Brutus has rived my heart. A friend should bear his friend's infirmities, but Brutus makes mine greater than they are.
I do not till you practice them on me.
You love me not.
I do not like your faults.
A friendly eye could never see such faults.
Our flatterers would not, though they do appear as huge as high Olympus.
Come, Antony and young Octavius, come. Revenge yourselves alone on Cassius. But Cassius is a weary of the world. Hated by one he loves, brave by his brother. Checked like a bondman, all his faults absurd, set in a notebook, learned and conned by rote to cast into my teeth. Oh, I could weep the spirit from mine eyes. Here is my dagger, and here my naked breast. If that thou beest a Roman, take it forth. I that denied thee gold will give my heart. Strike, as thou didst at Caesar. For I know when thou didst hate him worst, thou lovest him better than ever thou lovest Cassius.
It was a great help to have played it on the stage and to know exactly where the modulations and things came. And I remember thinking that it was such a pity that Brando had never seen the play or really knew it well, because he was asked to play bits of scenes out of order and not knowing where the climaxes came and so on. And I would like to have helped him with that, but nobody suggested it, and I wasn't going to be tactless enough to push my way about. They all thought I was coming to teach them how to play Shakespeare in Hollywood, and so I kept a very low profile. And he was charming to me, and I liked him immensely. And the one day that he asked my advice about something, one of the few scenes we had together, I went to his caravan and went through the speech with him and showed him things where I thought there should be different phrasing and color and so on. And he came down the next morning and filmed it using every single thing that I'd given him. And then a few weeks later, Mankiewicz said, "Oh, do come and see. He's done the big speech over Caesar's body so wonderfully. And I think you ought to see the rushes." So I went in and saw the rushes. And I was very disappointed. And I thought, oh, I wish I'd been able to help him over this, because I thought he was just imitating Olivier. He did some great shouts and things. And I didn't think he was nearly as good in that as he could have been if I'd been able to help him. But naturally, I didn't offer to. But he gave a very striking performance, and even seeing it again now and recently, it's amazing how well it comes out. But he was very subconscious and very nervous. He used to come on the set looking perfectly wonderful in a sort of tomato-colored toga and clear, straight fringe, and with a cigarette in one corner of his mouth, and then he'd take it out and put it behind his ear to sort of show he wasn't being posh, you know. He was awfully afraid of being sent up silly in this costume and sort of being West End actor, Shakespeare stuff.
Had I as many eyes as thou hast wounds, weeping as fast as they stream forth thy blood, it would become me better than to close in terms of friendship with thine enemies.
Mark Antony.
Pardon me, Caius Cassius. The enemies of Caesar shall say this, then in a friend of his cold modesty.
I blame you not for praising Caesar so. But what compact mean you to have with us? Will you be pricked in number of our friends, or shall we on and not depend on you?
Therefore I took your hand, but was indeed swayed from the point by looking down on Caesar. Friends, am I with you all and love you all, upon this hope that you should give me reasons why and wherein Caesar was dangerous.
Or else were this a savage spectacle. Our reasons are so full of good regard that were you, Antony, the son of Caesar, you should be satisfied.
That's all I seek, and am moreover suitor that I may produce his body to the marketplace, and in the pulpit as becomes a friend, speak in the order of his funeral.
You shall, Mark Antony.
Brutus, a word with you. Do not consent that Antony speak in his funeral? Know you how much the people may be moved by that which he will utter?
By your pardon, I will myself into the pulpit first and show the reason of our Caesar's death. What Antony shall speak, I will protest he speaks by leave and by permission, and that we are contented Caesar shall have all true rights and lawful ceremonies. It shall advantage more than do us wrong.
I know not what may fall. I like it not.
Brando realized he had to change his acting style for Shakespeare, who demands special qualities from his actors, on stage or screen. Success and failure in the great parts can often come as a surprise.
Well, Olivier and I have always said we were so lucky, both of us, to play parts that were written for bass. We were both tenors. Of course, even Macbeth really would be better with a bass. And when I was young, there were a great many actors with bass voices, Oscar Ashe and Godfrey Turle, and a number of very beautiful voices. But none of them played those great parts. Ash played Othello. I know what he was like. Lang was supposed to have been good in it. But Robeson was surprisingly ineffective. He couldn't speak blank verse. He played it again at Stratford towards the end of his life and was enormously popular there.
I saw the second one, and he didn't seem to be able to put any variety into it.
Well, that's a little of what happened with Orson Welles. Orson had this magnificent voice, this wonderful presence, wonderful quality and fun and everything. But I found both in his Macbeth and Othello film, wonderful moments as there were in both of them, there was no progression. And even in Chimes at Midnight, he never had anybody to act with. We all did a week in the film, and then we left. He couldn't afford to keep us on. So we never acted with him at all. And although he knew the part so well and had played it in a variety of times, he somehow didn't, after the beginning, we thought how splendid, he looks wonderful, sounds wonderful. He didn't move in some funny way. There was no progression. And I think that was one of his few great faults. First time I met him was very funny because I agreed rather rashly to do a series about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson with Ralph. And Orson was engaged to come over for one day and play Moriarty in one scene. And there's a record of it, which is a 78 record, which used to be played at parties as a joke, in which I pretend to be the coalman and something, bring up the coals, matey, or something I say in a terrible Cockney accent. And then I met him again at Olivier's when I was staying with them at Motley near here. And they had this beautiful country house. And I was invited for the weekend, and I got into the St. James's Theatre where they were playing. And there was Orson Welles in the dressing room, and I was very thrilled to meet him. And then we got in the car to go down to this country. And he was in front, and I was at back. And I very casually said, "What are you doing here? What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to play Othello." I said, "On the stage in London?" He wasn't at all pleased. And then the next day, he was up very early, it was seen on the lawn, but when I got up, perhaps late, he would disappear. They said he's gone to London on business. So I wondered whether he was offended with me or something. Anyhow, we were almost ready to go to bed at about 10:30, and suddenly the front door went, and Orson arrived, starving, so I had no dinner. Vivian had to go and unlock the cupboards and make scrambled eggs for him. And I said, "Oh, well, Orson, did you have a good day?" He said, "Not at all. She cried the whole time." So that was my second meeting with him.
The long-standing partnerships that Gielgud has enjoyed throughout his career have tended to be with actors whose range and emotional depth can match his own.
You've acted with Irene Worth on a number of occasions.
Yeah, she's one of my greatest friends and one of the best actresses that I've ever worked with. She stood by me during the hectic Oedipus of Seneca, which we did at the National, which some people disliked so much and others thought was rather wonderful. I was always very sorry that it wasn't either recorded or photographed, because it was a remarkable looking production and a marvelous sounding production. But Olivier never liked it. There were terrible rows before the first night between him and Peter Brook, and so it was never recorded in any form. But there was a famous occasion when one of the late dress rehearsals, Irene got a bit temperamental because she was playing this difficult thing of having to sort of immolate herself on a spike at the end of the play, and she shouted out, "Peter, I can't do this bit. They've moved my plinth." And I said, "Do you mean Prince Philip or Prince Charles?" Which made everybody laugh and shared up the atmosphere a little bit.
Well, there was so much fuss about the great golden phallus.
Well, that was the trouble, you see. And Olivier thought that the theatre would be closed because the censor would be so shocked. And he came round, and they had a terrible quarrel in my dressing room very late at night after the dress rehearsal. And I left in exhaustion at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the next night when I came back, there was a great big full-length mirror on the door. And there was a crack in it right from top to bottom. And I was told that one of them had thrown an ashtray at the other. I don't know which one it was and who threw it. But anyhow, it obviously practically ended in a fight. And Olivier was very annoyed by the whole production and never kind of gave it his blessing or came near it again. So I suppose that that was why it was never recorded.
The longest and most successful partnership was with Ralph Richardson. In 1962, Gielgud directed The School for Scandal, with Ralph as Sir Peter Teazle.
I had terrible trouble with him because he wouldn't decide how to come on in the first scene. We kept on putting off the rehearsals and wasting time, and I said, "Come on, Ralph, you must decide. How are you going to come on in the first scene?" What I think was that he wasn't very pleased because he had an entrance from the side, And we had a circular, rather open scene with the first scene. And the second scene was a sort of front cloth with two side entrances, which he had to come on for his first scene. And like a true pro, he didn't really like it very much. And he used to wander around the back of the scene in the first act, looking to see how we were all doing and frowning if we didn't get laughs in the right places. And then he would come on. So I would say, well, come on, Ralph, how are you going to do the beginning? He said, well, you know, Johnny, I prayed to God last night before I went to bed, and I said, please, God, tell me how to come on. And, you know, this morning, God answered, and God said, do what it says in the book, just come on. So he couldn't decide whether to have a snuff box or a newspaper or a stick or what he was to have. And he simply would not make up his mind. And it was such an enchanting way to tell me about it. But he was awfully good in it.
In 1970, they played together in Home by David Storey. The home in the title turns out to be for the mentally ill, touchingly played by Sir Ralph and Sir John.
I read the play 2 or 3 times and was very taken with it, but didn't understand it. And I was sent for to the Court Theatre by Lindsay Anderson and William Gaskill and David Storey, who were all there in a very small office. And I was very hesitant, thinking of the Court Theatre and Nouveau, avant-garde and all that. And I don't really understand this play, but I think there's something very fascinating about it. And Storey had such charm and was put it so nicely that on the strength of his personality, I said, well, I will do the play. And then I think they said to me, who do you think should play the other part? And I said, you ought to get Ralph. He would be wonderful in it. And they jumped at it. I think it's one of the most beautiful plays I've ever been in. It kind of symbolized the modern world and its horrors. And it was compassionate and touching.
See the church. Shouldn't wonder he is disappointed.
Oh, yes.
Heartbreak.
Oh, yes.
Same mistake. Won't make it twice.
Oh, no.
Once over, never again.
You finished?
Well,
Take on back.
now that's very. What yes.
Home went from the West End to Broadway. 5 years later, they repeated their successful double act in the National Theatre production of No Man's Land.
Peter Hall sent me to No Man's Land, and I galloped through it in 3/4 of an hour, and was immediately thrilled with this part. And Peter, who I then spoke to, said, oh, I thought you wanted to play the posh part. And I said, no, I want to play Spooner, it's much better for me. And I said, you ought to have Ralph for the other one. But I think he had already engaged Ralph for the other part. I certainly did suggest Ralph for Home, but I don't know whether I did for Home and No Man's Land as well. I think probably not. But anyhow, it was perfect casting. And those wonderful falls he used to do at every rehearsal and every performance was extraordinary.
I speak to you with this startling candor because you are clearly a reticent man, which appeals, and because you are a stranger to me, and because you are clearly kindness itself. Do you often hang about Hampstead Heath?
No.
But on your excursions, however rare, on your rare excursions, you hardly expect to run into the likes of me, I take it.
Hardly.
I often hang about Hampstead Heath myself, expecting nothing. I am too old for any kind of expectation. Don't you agree?
Yes.
A pitfall and snare if ever there was one. But of course I observe a good deal on my peeps through twigs. A wit once entitled me a betwixt twig peeper.
A most clumsy construction, I thought.
Infelicitous.
My Christ, you're right.
What a wit!
You're most acutely right. All we have left is the English language. Can it be salvaged? That is my question.
You mean in what rests its salvation?
More or less.
Its salvation must rest in you.
It's uncommonly kind of you to say so. And you too, perhaps, although I haven't sufficient evidence to go on as yet.
You mean because I've said a little?
You're a quiet one. It's a great relief. Can you imagine two of us gabbling away like me? It would be intolerable. Oh, by the way, with reference to peeping, I do feel it incumbent upon me to make one thing clear. I don't peep on sex. That's gone forever. You follow me? When my twigs happen to, shall I say, rest their peep on sexual conjugations, however periphrastic, I see only whites of eyes, so close they glut me. No distance possible. And when you can't keep the proper distance between yourself and others, when you can no longer maintain an objective relation to matter, the game's not worth the candle, so forget it and remember that what is obligatory to keep in your vision is space. Space in moonlight, particularly, and lots of it.
You speak with the weight of experience behind you.
And beneath me. Experience is a paltry thing. Everyone has it and will tell his tale of it. I leave experience to psychological interpreters, the wet dream world. I myself can do any graph of experience you wish to suit your taste or mine. Child's play. The present will not be distorted. I am a poet. I am interested in where I am eternally present and active. I have gone too far, you think?
I'm expecting you to go very much further.
Really? That doesn't mean I interest you, I hope.
Not in the least.
Thank goodness for that. For a moment, my heart sank.
After the break, John Gielgud, an actor's life, who returned to reveal how he shocked the thespian elite by agreeing to appear in the infamous Caligula.
Arthur won him new recognition. But New York is not the easiest of locations.
It's a terrific heat wave, July or June. And we filmed for a whole week in front of the Plaza Hotel with cars driving up and down and a queue of people trying to look on. And us sitting in our chairs by the fountain looking rather grand, me in my business suit. And that was also a tremendous sort of baptism of fire because one had to ignore this great crowd that was watching and the screams of silence when they wanted to make a shot. And then on the second day, one of the people who was walking by, one of the passerby, refused to move, and the assistant director went and tried to move, and he wouldn't move, and then the director came over, and they got into a fight, and they were rolling about in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and he was a junkie, and they took him away to the police. So that was a great drama, too. And then we had sort of distinguished visitors, you know, some famous pop singer would arrive to see the shooting and would be brought and introduced to us very formally where we sat on the side of the middle of a shot. So you never quite know what's going to happen in films. And you never know who's going to be there. One gets very cautious. You suddenly see a strange face in the corner and you think, oh no, I don't want to act in front of that face.
Did you expect to get your Oscar for Arthur?
No, I didn't at all. And I didn't go over to receive it, which Mr. Sterraro, who got one the same year, was amazed by. But I really dread those great functions. I think they're so invidious, you know, all that comparing of people, and the people who are disappointed and the people who are... It was lovely to get it because I had no idea. I had no idea the film would be such a success. But I turned it down twice before I accepted it because I thought it was rather common and that there was a lot of bad language that my so-called public wouldn't approve of.
Talking of disapproval, you invited criticism when you appeared in Caligula.
Well, in Caligula, that was a most weird experience. They asked me, I was in no man's land, and I suddenly received a script. I'd met Gore Vidal years before with Tennessee Williams. Not liked him very much. I'd read a good deal of his work since then. I think he's as clever as paint. And he sent me a very flattering letter saying, we're going to do this marvelous film, my Caligula. It was a great script, Gore Vidal's Caligula in gold lettering on the script. We want you to play Tiberius, the emperor. So I took it home and read it. At the same night, of course, in great excitement. And I rang my agent in the morning and said, I'm not going to play. This is pure pornography. My first appearance is out of a swimming pool with a little boy and a little girl coming out from under my skirt. It's going too far. And it's all full of sex smut all the way through. And I wouldn't dream of doing it. So I turned it down. I got a frightfully stinking letter from Vidal saying, I suppose you've never read Suetonius. All these things really happened. And if you knew what Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee think about you, you'd be more careful of the way you behave. And, a frightfully rude letter, which I just laughed at and tore up. And I went off to France to do the Alan Rene film of Providence. And while I was there, my agent rang me up and said, they've offered you another part in Caligula. I said, don't be silly. And they said, yes, it is. It's quite a small part in the beginning, just 3 or 4 scenes, and there are no dirty bits in it. And you kill yourself in a bath, and it's a lot of money, and only 10 days' work. You ought to do it. So I felt awfully ashamed, really. And when I got in the plane to go to Rome, there was Peter O'Toole sitting next to me in the next seat, having accepted the part of the emperor. And I didn't know whether he knew I'd been offered it and turned it down. I said, Peter, are you really going to do all these disgraceful things? He said, oh, well, it's old Father Christmas. He said, it doesn't matter to me. He was in a very jolly, jovial mood. He didn't care a damn. But we had a lot of goings on because the director was a very peculiar man. One actress walked out because she said our dress was indecent. And it was so funny with all these naked creatures. We had this great bath scene, which I was only, in this case, looking on while Caligula got out of the pool with a little boy and girl. And there were about 20 women, girls and boys, frightfully good looking, all of them, all shaved to make them look younger. The girls were all, but they were all about stark naked. And the moment the bell rang for lunch, they all put their hands in front of their parts and rushed out to have pizza with their families who were waiting in the corridor to have lunch with them. And it was such a funny mixture of rudery and primness. It made me laugh very much.
He brought his own primness to a comic pitch for Charles Ryder's father in Brideshead Revisited, which, if anything, improved on Evelyn Waugh's original book.
It was rather amusing to do, I must say, and Jeremy Irons was awfully sweet and helpful and had, I thought, a very dull part in the scenes with me because he only had to say yes and no and more or less feed me the lines. I had all the good lines. But I loved the part because it was right out off the page of the book. The moment I read it, I was sure I was longing to play.
I had thought of putting in some time at an art school.
My dear boy, you'll find them all shut. The students go to Barbizon or such places and paint in the open air. There was an institution in my day called a sketching club. Mixed sexes, bicycles, pepper and salt knickerbockers, Holland umbrellas, and it was popularly thought, free love. Such a lot of nonsense. I expect they still go on. You might try that.
One of the problems of the vacation, Father, is money.
Oh, I shouldn't worry about a thing like that at your age.
You see, I've run rather short.
Yes?
In fact, I don't know how I'm going to get through the next couple of months.
Well, I'm the worst person to come to for advice. I've never been short, as you so painfully call it. And yet what else could you say? Hard up, penurious, distressed, embarrassed, stony broke, on the rocks, in Queer Street. Yes, well, let's just say you were in Queer Street and leave it at that.
Yes, but what do you suggest I should do?
Your cousin Melchior was imprudent in his investments and got into a very queer street. He went to Australia. Hater, I've dropped my book.
Never content to rest on his laurels, his enthusiasm for new dramatic experiences of all kinds led him into trying his hand at directing opera.
They asked me if I would do the Trojans at Covent Garden, and I was very excited. And I bought all the records and played them for about 6 months, because I can't read music at all, and I know nothing about singing, really. And I had a very great luck in having Kubelik, the first production I did there. And when it was revived a year or two later, I had George Schulte, both of whom were immensely sympathetic. And I realized at once that they were really the boss the moment they came into the rehearsals. It was important to be in good shape working with them, and that they would collaborate with me, what I was trying to do. And I got Mariano Andreu, who had done the Much Ado so well for me, to do the scenery and dresses. And it was a colossal job, because it was a 5-hour opera or something, these 2 operas together in one night. I didn't know why they couldn't have split them and done them 2 separate nights. And I had an American singer called Blanche Sable, who played Dido, and John Vickers, who played Aeneas. So I was really lucky in the people I worked with. Chorus, which of course was huge. It was about 50 people. They all brought their knitting, and they had to have lunch breaks and coffee breaks. And then they used to start, and then I couldn't stop them. And I used to say, "Stop that dreadful music." And I was absolutely terrified of handling them, because I was so excited when they first began to sing, and then I didn't know how to get them to stop. And I would stand at the right back of the theater looking at the scenes as they were going, in these big crowd scenes. And I would tear down the side aisle and across the very rickety bridge that goes across the orchestra and move some girl in the chorus who was in the wrong group, and bodily taking her by the waist and move her from one side of the stage to the other, and she'd go on singing without a moment's hesitation. And I couldn't quite get used. They never waited for notes at the end of rehearsals. And Vickers used to come on the stage in a bowler hat and an umbrella and say, "How many calls do I take after that aria?" Which wasn't quite what I expected, and he didn't wait for any of the acting notes that I had ready for him. They all expected me to have a secretary who would deliver notes, apparently. That's the custom, apparently, in opera, but I hadn't got one.
You were famous in earlier years for seeing literally everything in the theatre and the opera house and the cinema.
Oh, I did. I went all the time. And when I lived in London, which I did for 70 years, I went to movies about 3 times a week, and the theatre 2 or 3 times if I could. And I saw plays many times over that I liked very much. Choo-Chin Chow and the Beggar's Opera I must have seen about 20 times each. And I knew them all by heart and had their records and sang the numbers at home and so on. So, and I knew the names of all the actors. So when I came to work in the West End in the 30s, it was awfully exciting for me to work with a massive, splendid actors and actresses who I'd only seen from the front before. And to find that I could meet them on equal terms was very, very exciting and gratifying.
What today do you think an actor needs to learn?
I have no idea what to say. I could never teach acting at all, I'm sure. I never have been moved to do so. And I think I'd be very, very harsh on people when they were beginning. But it's a question of the kind of play you're going to do. I mean, there is a new kind of written play without entrances and exits and climaxes and curtains, which were the things that I sort of looked for in plays when I read them when I was young, that don't exist that way. And I've always been terribly perplexed by Brecht and Beckett, neither of whom I've ever really admired very much. But if you're a good actor, then you're good in every kind of thing, or you should be. I mean, I think you have to be very careful about your limitations of personality. On the other hand, if you dare to exceed them, like Olivier so often does, you can sometimes produce works of genius, as he did. I mean, he's always been a superb comedian, and he has a touch of effeminacy which he uses to great effect in certain parts. So he combines this tremendously macho image with a tremendous sensitivity, which is a superb combination.
But you have also often been stretched beyond your expectations.
Well, certainly in Angela, I was rather surprised, and Leontes, that I came out as well as I did. Cassius, too. But I've just trusted what people think I can do, and have entrusted me with. One's always said, and I've talked about this to Olivier, it's so interesting that you can take one of the great Shakespeare parts and play them in a number of ways. When he made his great success as Othello, I was staggered when he came on in the first scene sniffing the rose. and played it as a very vain man. And I then remembered, to my dismay, that right early in the rehearsals of Othello, when I did it with Zeffirelli at Stratford with such a disastrous effect, that he said, I believe this man is very vain. And I said, oh, nonsense, he's the great warrior who everybody respects and admires so much. But Olivier found it, and it was very marvelous for his performance. And in the same way, his Macbeth, which I think was definitive, he came on with a black soul in the first scene with the witches, who felt he was a wicked man before he even started being tempted, whereas Shakespeare really makes him a white hero in the beginning, and not really tempted to do the murders until he meets the witches and he comes back to the wife. But Olivier made it so obvious that he had this black streak in his nature, that he would do terrible things, and it somehow colored the whole of his performance, and I thought it was superb. And it came off splendidly. And in the same way, in The Tempest, you see, with Peter Brook, I tried to convey in the last act that it was Shakespeare's kind of apocrypha, and that Prospero is really Shakespeare, who goes up almost to heaven at the end and resumes the kingdom as the great duke, whereas Peter Hall thought he was a tired old man who didn't want to go back, and didn't want the kingdom back at all, and that he kept his court clothes in the cave all those years, getting very shabby and rusty, and that he went in the last act with great reluctance to reclaim his kingdom, which was very interesting. So I played it in both ways. I myself naturally liked more putting on the beautiful robe and the crown and going up in a kind of wave of glory at the end of Peter Brook's production. But Peter's was very good for the epilogue, in which he apologizes for the play. So that it shows that in a great part there are so many colors and sides that you can play it in numbers of ways, particularly those four great tragic heroes of Shakespeare. I loved playing Macbeth, and some people thought I was quite good in it, particularly at the Vic. But I never could do the side, which of course is also demanded, which is so difficult to find an actor who can do it. The great warrior who cuts people in half and is a ruthless Scottish chieftain who fights in battles very well, and yet is a poet. And Othello has something of the same thing, this marvelous poetic language and this very brutal, savage nature. You've got to somehow combine the two to the audience's satisfaction, which is terribly difficult. And in a way, Hamlet too, I suppose, because Hamlet, who Olivier thought was the man who couldn't make up his mind, I didn't quite agree with that. But the fact remains that he does keep on saying, I ought to kill the king, and I don't. And you do rather wonder now and again why he doesn't. And again, the uncertainty and the sort of variety of his moods and the reactions of his nature are very strange, and if you didn't know the play so well, you would find very surprising.
Of the great actors you've seen, who is your greatest hero?
Oh, well, I suppose Ellen Terry, because of all the connection I had with her. But I always remember Lucien Guitry, who was the father of Sacha, and he had a great career on the French stage. He worked with Bernhardt a great deal, and L'Aiglon and things. And Yvonne Printemps was his mistress. He passed her on to his son, Sacha. And then she left Sacha and ran away with Pierre Freinet. So I knew, and I met her a few times. She was a fascinating creature. Didn't speak much English. But Lucien came over. They used to come every year, almost. Cochrane used to bring them, the Guitrys. And my parents, who spoke very good French, always went. And my father took me to see Lucien in a play called Jacqueline, in which he played a sadist of some sort. Apparently a very smooth businessman. In the second act, he had a scene with Yvonne Printemps, who played his mistress or his wife, I think mistress. They were in a private hotel in the Touquet or something, on a kind of elopement or something. And in the very end of the play, he had to strangle her. But you had no knowledge of this beforehand, except in this one scene, when she was on the bed or on the sofa, I think she was on a bed, and he was looking over her. And suddenly she said, I'm frightened of you, I'm frightened of you. And before my eyes, he grew about 2 feet. Completely became an absolute monster, and then just went back to what he was. And I watched so carefully to see what he would do. He did absolutely nothing. And I was convinced this was great acting. I've always remembered it ever since. Something quite extraordinary.
The stage presence of the great Italian actress, Eleonora Duse, once ignited the memory of another connoisseur of great acting, Charlie Chaplin, when Gielgud met him in Hollywood.
I began for some reason talking about Duse, who I'd seen in The Lady from the Sea in Ghosts, the last time she was in England in 1923. And Chaplin described going to see her. And he was so vivid and fascinating. We were in the middle of a huge cocktail party. He took me just aside and began doing this imitation of the Italian actor who was in the play with Dusa, and how he was giving a very showy speech, which Chaplin imitated in false Italian brilliantly, sitting astride a chair. And he said, while this man was giving this great aria, which the audience was lapping up, a very quiet-looking old lady suddenly appeared from behind the portiere at the back of the grand piano and moved slowly towards the fireplace and put her hands to the fire to warm them. And at that moment, the actor was completely blotted out. And Chaplin told all this so marvelously well. It was really thrilling. And I thought for my special benefit it was a tremendous compliment.
Do you feel there is an acting tradition that is passed on from one generation to another?
I think there must be, don't you? I think there must be. But how it will take the next generation, of course, one can't possibly tell, or how one will fare in the... I think it's a great advantage for one's survival in people's memories, anyhow, for 50 years, as you played the great classics. Although so many marvelous actors have never played in anything rather than comedies or very light plays. One of the great actors I ever saw was Charles Hawtrey, when I suppose is quite forgotten, and Gielgud, both of whom were tremendous, brilliant artists, but never played very ambitious things out of their own range. And therefore, the public didn't sort of remember them after they'd gone. It's shocking to me how quickly they're forgotten. There was a very charming article in the New Yorker a few weeks ago, a few months ago, by Brendan Gill, who was a critic there, saying that he was so glad that a rather bad book about the Lunts had been published, because he said that America has quite forgotten them already. And that seems dreadful to me, because they were such great figures all through my career. And they only died quite recently, really. She only died a few years ago, and Alfred about 10 years before that. And it is rather sad. And when one thinks that before television and tremendous communication, that it's supposed that in the end of the last century, in miners' cottages, you would find photos of Eleuterio and Irving. And they were such sort of national figures, although there was no publicity as we know it today. And yet at this time, Mrs. Patrick Campbell, Ellen Terry, people, Charles Hawtrey, Du Maurier, many people had never heard of them. That's awfully sad, of course. But then I don't think one should complain, because we're one of the few creative professions that gets a reward in our lifetime. If we have a success, or we have an audience that applauds us and cheers us and writes nice things about us, we actually have the pleasure of knowing it. When you think of all these marvelous painters who died penniless, and whose pictures are now getting millions of pounds, it's so ironic. And musicians too. And I suppose a great many... One doesn't know whether there were actors born to blush unseen who would have been great actors if they'd had the chance. I've always hoped, because people like Eminem Williams and Richard Burton seem to come so easily from their humble beginnings into big successes. Claude Rains was called by His Majesty's. Charlie Chaplin came from nowhere. I think if you have an outstanding talent, it's pretty sure to emerge sooner or later. But whether there are sort of middle talent people who are crushed by not getting the right part, or not being lucky, or having a great failure in some important job they take on, whether that has happened, one doesn't know.
You've scaled so many high peaks in your career. Which one would you like to be remembered for most?
Oh, I suppose for Hamlet, because it's a part that so many people have competed in. Truan's just sent me a book. He says he's seen how many? 7. What's the title? 80 something. 5 and 80 Hamlets he's seen. so there's quite a lot of competition, and naturally it's a part that I must have been appallingly conceited when I was young. I remember going to a party when I was an understudy of Cowherd with some of the company, not with him. He wasn't there, but somebody said, "What are you going to be?" I said, "I'm going to be a star." I can't believe that I was so impertinent at that time. And of course, I never thought I would be one, really. But I sort of hoped to be. And I did long to get my name up in lights and all that stuff. And I don't know how far one's ambitions push one, or how much they hold you back, because I think they can do both.
Is there a difference between being a star and a great actor?
Oh, of course. Masses of people are stars who are not great actors at all. I mean, I don't know what a great actor really is. You can be great in one. And so much depends on what you're given to act. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get a new play by a new author who is frightfully good, it's a wonderful combination to work on, because you haven't got to be compared with anybody. To create a new part, that's why I found Home and No Man's Land so rewarding, because they were two plays by actors, by writers I knew nothing about. In the ordinary would not have imagined I had much chance of working for. And also two very sympathetic directors. And then if that chemistry is all right, of course, you'll come out well.
Ralph Richardson said just before he died, you always painted with a very broad brush.
He did or I did?
He said that you did.
Oh, did he? I wouldn't have known that. Perhaps I think I do in Shakespeare. But in a modern play, I'm rather niggly, I think.
I'll ask you another question. Have you any idea from what I derive my strength?
Strength? No.
I have never been loved. From this I derive my strength. Have you ever been loved?
Oh, I don't suppose so.
I looked up once into my mother's face. What I saw there was nothing less than pure malevolence. I was fortunate to escape with my life. You will want to know what I had done to provoke such hatred in my own mother.
You pissed yourself.
Quite right. How old do you think I was at the time?
28.
Quite right. However, I left home soon afterward. My mother remains, I have to say, a terribly attractive woman in many ways. Her buns are the best. Her currant buns, the best.
Would you be so kind as to pour me another drop of whiskey?
Certainly.
I sheered off from joining the avant-garde for so many years, and threw cold water on Brecht and Beckett whenever I could. And yet when I went to the court and did the story play, Home and Pinter's No Man's Land, I was in raptures that I'd found something I could apparently act well in a very modern avant-garde play, which I also loved. So probably it's more a question of getting used to a style. In the same way, I mean, when one's young, one eats the first plate of oysters, or one drinks the first glass of Guinness, or you see a modern picture by Monet or Picasso or somebody, and I'll hear some modern music. I mean, when rock and roll first came in, I simply loathed it, and I haven't really got used to it yet. But the fact remains that when one was young and one was mad about Paul Whiteman and the Mount City Blue Blowers and all those records and music that one heard, one's parents shrugged their shoulders in horror and couldn't think what one was thinking about. Now, I always remember my father saying to me when he was quite an old man, I got as far as Sibelius, but I think I'm quite up to Shostakovich. And one is, I suppose, in one's old age, very liable to kick against any modern innovation of any kind, either in clothes, habits, food, recreation, everything. You have to kind of gear yourself up, and I think one rebels because one thinks one's own theories about everything in life must have become fairly cogent over 80 years, and you are very reluctant to change it. And yet you have to be alive to the changes and prepared to compromise in some way, I think. And I always have thought the theater is really a great compromise. I mean, in every production, you have to compromise in some way. You never get the absolutely perfect cast. You've got to compromise with the author, with the director, with the lighting man. The whole thing is a compromise, and it's a kind of miracle when it comes together, like good cooking. And if it happens to be that you have the right ingredients and they all come to the boil at the right moment, you have a success. But it is an extraordinary profession in that way. I think there's more luck in it, more hazard perhaps, than in any of the other artistic professions.